Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Podcast. It's our first podcast of 2025, but as ever, I'm joined by Barry.
Happy New Year, one and all. And yes, 2025, that'll be many months before I get used to not writing 2024 at the end of things, but that is the case for every year.
Just in time for 2026.
Almost, yeah, seems to be the case.
Well, we thought we'd kick off this year with a roundup of a year of games, the best game of the year, so to speak. But because we're still getting to grips with a lot of 2024 releases, we've decided to do a year in lieu and begin with our best choices, our favorites from 2023.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many games that come out every year. It's impossible to play even a small percentage of them, but what I find is that in the future year, or the year after it, you get a chance to catch up with more people and play more games that have come out, and then you get a much better idea for what was available the year prior. Although that said, I did still manage to play a lot of games in 2024 as well. Or 2024 games in 2024.
Well, likewise, but there's still quite a lot of my 2024 games that are sitting here. And we're gonna kick this off actually with some standouts from 2024, and then we're gonna dive into our favorites from 2023. But anecdotally, I just played Civolution, which is the new Feld game that people have been talking about. Now, I'd love to talk about that some more on the show, but I've only played it once, and I really feel like I need to try it a few more times before I can collect my thoughts on it. So it's nice to have a bit of time to get a holistic opinion.
Once at 2-player, and I don't think it's best at 2-player, so I need to get another couple of games in with more people to explore more of the map.
That's interesting. So did you have an issue flipping over the land tiles?
Yep. We covered like a quarter of the board at 2 players, and there was no real need to spread out and find other bits and pieces. I was going to say it was detrimental towards building for when we were looking to do that, but I don't know. It seemed to be, it was definitely missing an element of contention.
Well, and this is sort of speaking to my point, because there were a few takeaways I had for those of you that have played. I don't think we built enough strongholds or settlements, bigger buildings that give you income. So we didn't build enough of those, which I think might have stunted our development. Having said that, there are some, there's a lot of asymmetrical setting up of the beginning of objectives. And one of the objectives we had was to explore and expand was worth, extra points. So we did focus on that quite a bit. So, and it was again a 2-player game. So I think it might be one of those games that falls into the actually the same sort of trap that Marrakesh had, really, which was that it doesn't quite have a sweet spot for player count. I think 3 is probably the most likely candidate, as you've said. I didn't have the same problems as you at 2. And I thought we explored the map just fine. If we'd been more focused on, say, building settlements or developing our tableau, maybe that would have been different. But if those were where the points were in this particular game, maybe we would have, maybe that's just how the game is. Anyway, this is all to the point. We need to play a few more games to get a more holistic impression.
We'll discuss this next year in our 2025 roundup of, or 2026 roundup of 2024, yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. But we'll move on to our actual standouts from 2024. Would you like to go first, or shall I?
Sure, no, I'll go first. I had a few stats for the year. I played 901 times across 286 different games in 2024. Now, most of these were real life, 548, and that was across 210 games. The rest would be logged on Board Game Arena. Don't log apps generally. And 55 of them were actually released in 2024, so that's still one new game a week on average. My most played game of last year in real life was Shipwreck Arcana, which I think is a 2023 game, 2022 game. And despite my early hiatus on buying games, which if you go back to some of our earlier podcasts, I'm not buying any games, I still managed to buy 14 games from 2024 and many other games from other years besides. So a little bit of a fail on that front. And I've already got so many things queued up for next year coming from crowdfunding, but we'll see how that goes. So a couple of the sort of standout games for me, or the first standout game for me was Endeavour Deep Sea. Now this was a crowdfunded game, a sequel of sorts to Endeavour Age of Sail. Grand Gamers Guild, designed by Carol DeVisser and Jarrett Gray. And it was probably like my second most played game, had 11 plays of it, that includes some solo games. And for me, it just edges out SETI. I've not played SETI a lot, but both of the games gave me quite a comparable feel in terms of spreading out over the board and putting your little bits and working towards meeting your objectives and goals. It's not exactly the same, of course, but I think we'll see how that goes, because everybody that's played Endeavour Deep Seas liked it, but it's not quite pipped into the upper echelons of everybody being like, yeah, we've got to play it now, the sort of loved feel for it. And I think that's come down to a couple of plays have been a little dull in terms of exploration, even at higher player counts. I'd played Scenario 3, and for some reason all the conservation tiles came up first, and nobody got beyond... There was only like 2 depth 3 tiles by the time we were done, and this was a 3 or 4 player game. So it may drop, in my opinion, I think, with more games, and SETI has some potential to come up. But I think in the long term, the original Endeavour Age of Sail might be more of a keeper. We'll have to see.
That's interesting. So I think I've not played either of these as much as you have. I do have Endeavour Age of Sail, and I have played it, albeit quite a while ago. So I don't really, and I've only played Deep Sea once, and it was under the best possible circumstances, which is to say, 4 players who were very, very across the hobby and had lots of booze. So, and someone else was teaching.
Everybody in the mood for a good time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we played Scenario 2, and we really enjoyed it. I especially liked the way the exploration worked, revealing new tiles and sort of focusing people on these different things they could do, but fundamentally really driving timing interactions between the players. Because for me, in this sort of Euro game, where you're managing these sort of upgrade tracks and the different resources you've got and sort of recruiting, what you've got is this sort of tableau of workers that are going to give you sort of different kind of bonus actions when you use them, and they're sort of driving your action selection and what you can do, but you have to pay attention a little bit to what other people have got, because there's this whole sort of timing of when people are going to trigger their different things. I really liked that. That was the sort of the core appeal to me for the game.
I'd say the main difference between Endeavour Deep Sea and Endeavour Age of Sail is the direct player conflict. There's obviously no direct player I say obviously, but there is no direct player conflict in Deep Sea, but Age of Sail, you are literally combating other players at times. It's not that I actually like direct confrontation any more than passive working towards goals better than the other person. But it does just give it a little bit more teeth than Deep Sea, and means that the way it plays out with the sort of direct conflict can often be quite different. Whereas Deep Sea does kind of play out the same regardless of the scenario. You're looking for different things, and you're trying to get your dobbers down in different places, but it's kind of always the same. And so that's why I think giving repeated plays, getting through all the scenarios and playing each of them a number of times might drop it in terms of how regularly I want to be continuing to play it. And but it's also an odd one. Sorry, but just that when I'm saying, some games have been a little bit duff where we've not managed to explore the ocean at all. Other games we've filled the board, the 5x5 grid, and still had actions to spare. And I couldn't tell you what we do differently in the ones that we don't get anywhere from the ones that we get everywhere. So,
well, I found in the game that we played, I think we probably revealed about 65% of the map, but it wasn't a detriment to our enjoyment. No, in many ways, the tighter play space maybe made it more like a cat fight. for those resources and spaces.
I think that the worst game of it I've had, it was still fun enough, but was this sort of scenario 3. There's a lot of conservation you have to do, and the time spent, there was no dives that came up, so it was really hard to get the DNA to do the conservation.
Yep.
And everybody was just kind of moving around trying to pick up the odd bit of DNA or get to the dive tokens, and didn't help that one of the tiles you can only access from other tiles to go diving, and somebody put that on the edge, and so suddenly we had to go all the way around to get to the next dive tile and stuff. Anyway, that's up to the players. That is within the players' control.
And so, how many players can play Endeavor Deep Sea?
5.
And have you played across 5?
No, I think I've just played. Yes, no, 2, 3, 4. Unless at Barrycon we played 5, I can't remember. I think we might have played 5 at Barrycon. I mean, that would be why we filled the board, I think.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And so it's a scenario-based game. It's got something like 10 scenarios. And how many have you played?
Just 4 or 5. But they don't fundamentally change the game so far, at least. Like, I'm only on the first few. I've not done the back end of them. It's just really, you want your dubbers at level 3 instead of level 2. You want them on conservation tiles or sonar tiles in columns A and E instead of columns B and D. The actual layout of the shared scoring board doesn't make that much difference, or at least it hasn't so far, where you're putting down your objective markers, you get a few points for them, or you might get a resource for them. And sure, the layout's different. You can only move a certain way through them, but they're the same things. So far it's not made a massive difference, although it does seem to have a difference on how it plays out. As I say, when scenario 3, which was conservation heavy, and we got all those tiles early, but then you didn't have any way to power that engine, and so the game stalled. But that was within our control. If we were better at the game, if we knew the game better, we didn't necessarily have to do that. But the scenario pushed you towards it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, still good.
Well, there we go. Standout from 2024. So we'll see. We'll check in this time next year. Will Barry have dropped it down to below Endeavor Age of Sail? You've inspired me to get Endeavor both actually back to the table and see if I can formate my opinion so we can have a more detailed discussion next time. I'll jump in with mine because it's obvious. It's Arcs. It was my most played game of 2024.
It's all you've talked about for like the last 4 podcasts.
I know, and I'm going to stop now. This will be the last time I ever talk about it until it gets to best of 2024. But I mean, it's actually sort of 2 entries really as well, because it's Arcs and the Blighted Reach, which is really kind of a distinct and separate game. Honestly, it's almost like the same action selection mechanism and basic rules, and then that's where the similarities start to diverge. But I've been thinking about Arcs and the best way to describe it, because it's obviously not a faultless game, and it's certainly a game that is definitely 2 different people's tastes, and it's also like, I think, not the kind of game that it's immediately apparent what it is, because I think when you look at it, you might think it's like a 4X game, or you might imagine it's got sort of diverse strategies. I've heard people compare it to, stuff like Game of Thrones, but it's really nothing like that. So I think people sort of struggle to find something to compare it to put it into the context of the hobby. And it's just it's a tactical battle. I mean, really what it is it's kind of pure warfare the entire time, but also a war of attrition, going on over the course of the entirety of the game, with a real ebb and flow as forces are beaten back and recuperate and reinforce, and the objectives of the battle are dynamically changing. And because it got me thinking about, like, sort of in the context of a 4X, it's not an economic game. everything is actions. Even the resources are just bonus actions, or they allow you to take different actions. So, and a lot of the cards that you build up in your tableau are, again, just objectives, points towards scoring objectives and bonus actions. So it's really all about action efficiency and action economy and holding on to objectives. And that's kind of the whole game. So it's super dynamic, and it's got this real sort of ebb and flow and it's hyper aggressive as well, because the interesting thing about the battles and the dice that resolve the battles are that there's a huge, actually, I think often overlooked by new players, importance to being able to pick the dice and pick them at the right moments, and knowing when to take a bigger risk with, say, assault dice or raid dice, which allow you to do more damage or steal your opponent's things respectively, and when to hold on and use, for example, skirmish dice. And they can be quite swingy, and you can also mix and match. So there's an incredible amount of like diversity there, but it is kind of just an evolving battlefield war game that is hyper aggressive. And I do think it doesn't have that appearance.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it incredibly exciting. And one of the things that I think gets it back to the table a lot, for me particularly, is because it's relatively, I think the depth of strategy and sort of depth of gameplay to set up, tear down, and teach time is exceptional. Like, I can teach it to people in under half an hour. I can set the game up in, 5 minutes, and the actual amount of game we get out of that is really, really high. And then, so I think that does a lot for it. I also think that it could be overburdened by, for example, the deck of cards, the guild deck, which could be massive and highly variable. But I think it's exceptionally well tailored. It's exactly the right size. You can learn that deck in like a game and a half. And then, because it's so important to understand that deck and the quality of the cards. And likewise, leaders and lore as well just kind of adds exactly the right amount of flavor to it. So I just think, it's certainly a real winner for me and in my group. But it is a very particular kind of thing. And, if you're not into your war games and your battlefield games, then it's just it's not going to appeal to you, I don't think.
Well, I certainly hope to play the full game with the right rules at some point. I've been played it a couple of times and got it wrong each time.
The next time I'm down in London, I'm going to pin your gaming group down and we're going to play for sure.
Yeah. Sounds reasonable. And then we don't have Blighted Reach. I think the fact the Blighted Reach costs more than the base game. You have to be quite sure that you like arcs before diving into the campaign side of things. But if we get a few more games in this year, again, this may be something talking about next year as well.
Yeah, and I think that Blighted Reach almost, I actually think it's not unimaginable that someone might dislike arcs and like Blighted Reach. And because arcs really is a sort of abstracted battlefield, right? Like, there's a tiny amount of flavor in that you're space civilizations, and you might have those leaders and lore cards giving you a bit of extra flavor. Like, you might be the warriors with mirror shields on your ships, and that gives you, some extra bonuses when you do battles and some extra defense on your ships. Fine. Or you could be, the empaths who score extra from empathy, but you have a rail gun that allows you to attack at range. So you're like, I'm going to get lots of empathy and, stay away from me or I'll blast you, don't come next to me. But really, it's quite an abstract game. Like, the action selection system of getting taxation or battle actions or build actions is all a hand of cards, and there's no reasonable way to explain how your actions are so limited if you're a space civilization. Like, why can't I just tax whenever I want to? It's my civilization. I'm in charge, you know? Um, or you've got a handful of six tax cards, and you're like, well, I guess all I'm doing this turn is taxing, even though I'm the warriors.
Yeah.
And obviously the game gives you mechanisms to get away from that. You could play your tax to copy someone else's battle or whatever. But we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of it. The point is that it's quite abstracted. Blighted Reach flips that entirely on its head. It's a much longer and more epic game. Obviously, it's like a miniature campaign. It's 3 linked games, but it doesn't offer rote narrative really at all. It's not like there's an adventure book that you get out and you start reading text. Again, the premise is that there is an empire which is made up of the players plus some overarching, cohesive structure. And this manifests simply by a bunch of ships on the board that start on the board that are communal, and so everyone controls them, and a bunch of rules that follow. You are sort of the distinct noble houses within this empire that make it up. And every player gets a fate card, which tells them sort of who they are within the context of this empire. But the Blighted Reach comes in, which is this sort of back end of space or whatever. This empire is sort of crumbling, I suppose. And the Blight is this alien race, ambiguous, creeping death. It could be xenomorphs. It could be, I was about to say Turnids, but that's the same thing. It could be mind spores or whatever. Who knows, right? It doesn't really matter. The creatures look like sort of blobby attack things, but again, very abstracted. But where the game sort of the premise of the game, gives you these fate cards, which are hugely thematic and give you a real sense of what you're doing. Like, you might be the custodian of the empire, seeking to sort of run its day-to-day administrative stuff, and that gives you all kinds of responsibilities. You might be the admiral of the empire's fleet, which lets you do all kinds of extra things with those communal ships. You might be these religious fanatics, and what you want to do is actually seed a new suit of cards into the action deck that represent the influence of your god. And all of these factions come with separate objectives that they're trying to achieve. And actually the winning of the game of arcs, that is to say accruing the most power by the end of the game, or hitting that power threshold and triggering the end of the game, is less important perhaps than meeting these objectives. Because at the end of a game of Blighted Reach, you will be checked on your power level, but you're going to lose a bunch of it. But if you don't have your objectives met, you have to pivot to a separate fate. If you do have your objectives met, you go to echelon 2 of your fate. And again, this isn't really a direct measure of your success in the game. I mean, it's a direct measure of your success insofar as you are extending the fate that you've chosen to pursue, or that you've been given to pursue. But it's not like, it's not like by achieving all your objectives, you have won the game. It just means you're going to keep doing that fate. And where the game, I think, sort of will put people off or bring people in is that, it's the first 2 games are really all just kind of set up to see what the third game looks like, So you're playing through these 2 games, and did you pivot? Did you do your objectives? How much power do you have? What does the board state look like? You can go into the third game and there's no empire left and everyone's a renegade and it's totally blighted. You could go in and the same things are true, but there's no blight. You could go in and the empire is very strong and the blight's largely been wiped out, and everyone's still in the empire and behaving quite collaboratively, so it's this sort of hugely dynamic situation that can really only be evolved through the players playing 2 games of Blighted Reach and the decisions they've made. And it introduces this concept of events, which are cards in the action deck that come up, and these trigger these whole sort of diplomacy sections, which are probably less of a negotiation than they might seem when you read the rules. It sounds like it's going to be a big sort of negotiation. It's probably more akin to the brief negotiations you have in Twilight Imperium. I'm going to get in trouble here because people are going to say, "Oh, no, the Twilight Imperium."
Nothing like that.
They're huge. They're big, long negotiations in Twilight Imperium. I don't know. In my experience, they've been relatively brief, usually with people coming out one side or other on the laws. But it also introduces this concept of favor tokens that you can give away to other people. So you can say, do this thing for me, and I'll give you a favor token. You can also just get them through game mechanisms and trade them in for other people's stuff, and people can negotiate with you and ask you not to do that. So there's a lot more sort of dynamism in the game state that's within this sort of level of negotiation. But as a sort of a ludonarrative experience, as a sort of a space opera, it is incredible and unparalleled. As a strategic war game, I think it is incredibly long, and the outcome can feel very random, so people might be very put off by that.
Right. Yeah.
Personally, I loved it. If I wanted a strategic war game, I'd play the base game. If I wanted, an all-day space opera that was totally unpredictable and I had no idea how it was going to come out, I'd absolutely play Blighted Reach. I think it's great.
Well, as I said, I'll need to get some more games in, but I need to get the rules right first.
Yeah, this is Blighted Reach is even more rules. So,
well, we've still not played with the leaders, so do that first, and then we'll scale up to it.
Exactly right, as you should.
Yeah. Fine. Second game I wanted to highlight from 2024 is one that I only played just recently, just the sort of Festivus period between Christmas and New Year there, and that is Inventions, Evolution of Ideas. This is published by Eagle Griffin Games, and it's a Vital Lacerda game, and it is my first Lacerda. I've not played any of his other games. He's always, the game's held with great reverence by many people, and I looked at this and I thought, yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm going to like, and I played it, and it was great. Again, got a couple of rules wrong. I'd like to point out to people listening, watching, that often I do get the rules right. But again, this is just the first game. We hadn't really learned it beforehand, but we weren't chaining things properly. It wasn't a massive thing, but it did mean that we got a little less done than we probably could have. The bonus actions from chaining, you get to do at least one per turn, but we were doing one per round, which was like every 3 turns, which was wrong. And so the value of certain actions that allowed you to change were different for our game, but it was still fine. We got the basics of it down. We've seen how everything played out. It was really good fun, and I want to get a lot better at it and get a lot more games in. Played 3-player, and there was enough contention on the board. The game as a whole, you are going through the development of man through the ages, from the Stone Age all the way up to sort of AI future singularities, if you get that far. And you've got 2 elements, one of which is your personal player board, where you're putting down your upgrades and discoveries and technologies, and you've got the board in the middle, which is a sort of small area control type game, where you want majority in order to place down your ideas, and you get that by progressing mankind, by coming up with an idea, by making the invention, by modifying the invention, or sharing it with the world. And the game just goes around these sort of 5-6 ages where you're doing different things. But at its core, it's a worker placement with a sort of map area, which kind of turns into area control, and also some end game objectives, and then your personal player board that gives you your engine abilities, where you're upgrading what you can do and what you have access to there. And yeah, really good time. I think if I was going to compare it to something, I initially thought of Carnegie, and I thought maybe I'm only thinking of Carnegie because they're both done, the art for both is done by Ian O'Toole,
Yeah.
and they both have this kind of sort of teal, turquoise, green colour going on it. But it is, they're very different games, and there's definitely place for both of them. But I did feel like, actually, if I was going to play something like Carnegie or Inventions, at the moment, with my very limited plays, I've played more Carnegie. Inventions is the one that I would kind of want to get to the table again to play. It is easier to get what you want done in Inventions. There's more fun to be had with the chaining the actions, with trying to get the sort of combo pieces going. Carnegie's quite, you've got to plan ahead. And if you get that wrong, you can have a very bad time in Carnegie. I think you can go a little more wrong in Inventions. You still might not win, but you'll have a better time losing. But there's definitely room for both. They're not the exact same game by any stretch of the imagination, but having this sort of shared board area, and you're working on each other's actions, so what actions other people pick affect you in Carnegie, and what inventions people have and what age they're in and things like that affect what you do in Inventions. So very good time. I think this is probably going to rise in my estimation the more I play. But that said, I did play solo. Now, there is a solo module where you would run two bots. One bot's very straightforward, the other bot's a little more complex. And I sat down once to play it, gave up after the first round, sat down again, played it all the way through. I never want to play it again. It's no fun. The overhead to just... The automa does things slightly different than the base actions. So when the automa does a invent action, it does something different than you do, and it's just enough to keep you always going back to the rule book. What was that again? What was the difference for what they needed to do? No fun. And I don't think I'll play it at 2-player either, because you have to run the easy bot in 2-player to simulate a 3rd player, and I just don't want to do that. So I think it'll be a strictly 3 or 4-player game for me going forward. But it was a really good game playing against other people.
Well, I'm excited to try it. I have played. I mean, I'm surprised. I'm surprised you've been in the hobby this long without playing any Vital Lacerda. But I think it's also one of those things where if you don't have one yourself and you don't have a friend who's like, we've got to play it, I can see, because it's quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. Nobody I know has got Kanban. Nobody's got what else did he do? Like, you've got on Mars.
Yeah, on Mars.
Rude.
But of course, he did Vinos. He did Lisboa. He did the Gallerist. He's done the CO2, carbon dioxide. That's the cooperative one.
Loads of things. And as I said, obviously very well regarded. But I've just nobody in my group had the game. I never came up as an opportunity to play with somebody else, because it's not the kind of thing you just spring on somebody, I would guess.
No. So I'm surprised to hear that you and your group sat down and you're like, no, we didn't really know the rules.
Yeah,
but
the rules are we get it right next time.
To be fair,
it's quite a minor thing.
My first experience of Vital Lacerda was, when Vinos came out, whenever that was. So probably not long after I sort of started to make friends playing board games in London 10 years ago or something. I don't know. And
2010 was Vinos.
Yeah, okay, so a long time ago. And yeah, we did just show up and we're just like, oh, we're going to play the wine game. And then we started trying to learn it and we're like, oh my God, what is this?
Maybe viticulture.
Yeah, should have started with viticulture. Yeah. But, I like Vital's games. I'm usually happy to play them. I find I like some more than others. On Mars is one that I really... Oh, Escape Plan as well, of course. On Mars is one that I like conceptually, and I've kept around, but I don't know. I might change it out for a different one, because it is a lot. And although I like it, it just gets to the table less and less, And I think I'd rather maybe have one that's just a bit more accessible, because I think if you are a Vital Lacerda person, then and you're across all of his games and you can just get them out on a whim, then great stuff. And I think On Mars probably does have a place in the collection because I do think it's probably the logistically most challenging. And when I say that, what I mean is managing the logistics of the game. So a lot of his games are sort of managing these, sort of supply lines between what you want to do and what you have to do in order to get there, right? Um, and it's going to be checking things along the way. Like, do you have enough of the resource you need? Do you have the workers in the right position? Um, you need to take the action to commit the workers to the positions, which is, and as Barry says, sort of chaining, but chaining into a sort of a logistics supply chain that then let you to pull the trigger on the thing you really want to do. And On Mars is the most demanding form of that because it's functionally got two boards and you're moving your main piece between the two boards, right? Which is the planet's surface and outer space. Getting the timing of that right is exceptionally difficult because it makes all the logistical things you'd normally do in a normal Vital Lacerda game twice as complex. And I played Speakeasy quite recently, actually. That's one of the 2025 games I've played. And I thought it was a really sort of exceptional example of Vital's stuff. And a lot of what you're saying about Inventions, like the sort of territory control aspect on the board and the managing of the logistics in your player area, felt really familiar, actually, to the experience I had with Speakeasy. So I'd be really keen to try Inventions and see how it goes. I think, when Vital is designing at his best, they are exceptionally good games and also like quite unique because I don't know, like I guess Vinos was actually probably one of the first heaviest Euros I'd ever played. And so whenever I'd think about a heavy Euro, I'd picture Vinos. And actually the more heavy Euros I played, the more I realized that actually Vital's games are, quite unique and quite like their own sort of thing.
Set apart, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he does have 4 games in the top 100: Kanban, On Mars, Lisboa, and The Gallerist. So, and the rest of his games are generally quite well regarded.
Yep, you definitely don't need them all, though. Don't let that completionist vibe get you.
Unless, of course, you would like to sponsor the podcast, in which case you do need them all, and you should buy them immediately.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
I think it's more of fun multiplayer. I think it's no fun to manage. So,
and actually, I know you've got a note here about Kronos. Is that a AI that runs on 2-player?
Yeah, there's Kronos and Hephaestus, and at 2 players, you're still running Kronos to simulate a 3rd player.
Right, and we don't. That sounds like it's a bit of faff.
Nah, it's not that hard. Like, he just moves to the next spot and does one of 4 things depending on what's available. But I just don't want to do it because there's so much to think about elsewhere for your own turn. I don't also want to be running a bot. I would recommend a 3rd player if you're at minimum if you are going to play it.
So to sort of wrap up Inventions, Evolution of Ideas, I think it'd be really... So actually, you mentioned that there were 4 of his games in the top 100?
Yeah.
And which one's number 1? Is it Lisboa?
Lisboa, yeah.
Yeah, that would have been my guess. So I would be very interested to hear your thoughts on Lisboa and Inventions after you've had a chance to play Lisboa, if that ever happens. In the meantime, I will try to get a play of Inventions in, and we'll see. We'll come back and talk about it some more.
Cool.
But I'm going to talk about a game that couldn't be more different to your traditional heavy Euro. This is Andromeda's Edge All In. This is a heavy game. It's got lots of Euro about it, but I wouldn't describe it as a heavy Euro. And here's why. But this is designed by Luke Laurie and Maximus Laurie and published by Cardboard Alchemy. And it was a big Kickstarter. Cardboard Alchemy largely published through Kickstarter and do these sort of big and beautiful productions. This is, of course, the sort of the spiritual successor to Dwellings of Eldervale. I did a big discussion around that on an earlier episode, so we won't go into that again. But it is a gorgeous production. It comes with a bunch of miniatures. All of the miniatures are, well, actually, it's the enemies that are miniature. The miniatures are all painted, and they have that like sort of dual tone plastic with the transparent stuff. They're super not like that important, but you're also going to be building a lot of buildings, and you need to put your leaders in them, and your leaders are just these tiny little pivots, and they slot into the buildings, and then it looks like they're chimneys and things. Like, it's all just incredibly, so like the toy factor is huge. And then like it's sort of, the game is huge to match. It's 1 to 5 or maybe even 6. I think it's 1 to 5 player. I know Mark has talked about the solo mode on his channel. I've played the 2-player game with Mark using the solo creature as well. Or the solo rules for sort of an AI player. So you can use that as a substitute for more player count if you want. But functionally, the game is sort of spacefaring races trying to rebuild their fallen empires, I guess. I've not read enough of the lore to really understand where we are exactly in space, but you come out of portals and then you're trying to build buildings. So that's my belief. We're either trying to colonize a new sector of space or rebuild fallen empires, or maybe both. The space we've entered into has a bunch of enemy ships flying around, and so you'll have to contend with those. You will have to improve your... Now, I was about to say improve your fleet, but really what you're doing actually is unlocking additional workers. This is like the prime example, I think, of like a hybrid game, because it's got so many Euro mechanisms, and it's so broad in its Euro mechanisms, but also it's got your workers that you're going to put out to take action in the worker selection portion of the game are also fighters who are like dudes on a map and will roll dice and attack each other and can jump into combat. And so there's dice combat. Your workers are also fighters. There's only like 5 of them. So it's not like you're amassing a giant army like Risk and marching across the map. You are just putting out workers to take actions, to go up tracks and produce resources and things. But then, at the end of your turn, battle might happen, and then other people might jump into the battle, and then you're all going to roll a bunch of dice to see who wins. And then there's also an element of area control. Now, not in terms of volume of soldiers, because you just don't have that many, but actually everyone wants to build these buildings for big scoring, and only one building per tile. So if you picture the board, it's a whole series of tiles that link together, and then most of those tiles are action selection spots. And you're going to put your spaceships out onto the tiles to choose the actions, and then they're going to fly around, enabling you to choose more actions. So you're going to be somewhat limited in later turns where you can put your workers based on where you've already placed them and their ship movement strength. So it's just, I started listing the mechanisms here in our podcast document, and it's crazy. Like there's like 6 tracks or something, and all of the tracks have like first come, first serve resources, unlock tiers of things, because each track is like linked into different mechanisms. So you've got like the war track and the culture track and the science track that's going to give you stuff, and ultimately you want to get to the ends of these tracks as well. And then there's event cards that are going to be coming up every like so often based on player actions, and those event cards are going to trigger scoring based on like the different tracks. So the higher you are up on the track that's going to get scored, the more points you're going to get. But also people can like peek at the event cards and then like rearrange them. So like you might not know what track's going to score. Someone might be seeding the track that's going to score. And then like, so you've got event cards, and then you've got this area control element of like putting your buildings out on the action selection tiles. And then there's dice combat. There's a whole tableau building thing, which is actually really important. There's the worker placement. You can upgrade the workers. there's scoring multipliers because all of those buildings are going to be worth points based on how far you made it up the corresponding track. And then there's the NPC units that are flying around, and more of those are going to unlock over the course of the game, unless they don't. There's this concept of resource investment because you're going to get these resource tokens, which you can spend for the resources on them, or invest them into your tableau, or put them into the graveyard spot, which is once only. But if you don't invest something in the graveyard, you're a fool. Definitely do that. And then you've got these combat cards you can play from your hand in combat to influence the outcome of the combats. You've got strategy cards, which look just like the combat cards, and they're in your hand of cards, but you play them at different times to change the outcomes of certain actions and things like that. There are the event cards I already spoke about. Everyone starts as a slightly asymmetrical faction, and then you've just got all the set resources, so you're just going to be able to grab resources from the table, like, ore and energy and things, and they all have different applications, so you can spend them to draw cards or power up your ships if they're shooting in combat. And then there's this like little set collection element, which actually is really broad because you can set collect like 4 different things, and some of them are the cards in the tableau, and some of them are like relics floating around in the outer rim of space. So it's a massive sort of Euro-y dice chucky sandbox that you're going to be playing in for probably 3+ hours. I've seen this coming out as a lot of people's like game of the year, and I'm sort of like, I'm torn about it because I really love playing in this sandbox, Barry. Like the chances I've had to play in the sandbox, I've really, really, really enjoyed, and I would happily go back and do it again any chance I got. On the other hand, I'm not entirely sure how to do better when I come out of the sandbox. I'm like, I've been playing and I've built all this cool stuff and it's done a bunch of great things, but I don't know next time like what I would do to do better. I would start playing in the sandbox again and have more fun, I guess, which is probably fine. Like not every game needs to be sort of a deep skill curve that you can master, right? And replayability can come as much from variety and discovery as it does from mastery. So that's replayability is kind of met by other things in this game because there's so much variety. But also like, I think it's probably best at like 3 or 4 real people. I mean, Mark really likes the solo mode. That's fine. I'm not going to talk about it because it's just not for me. Like there's no appeal there. But like subjectively, I'm just not interested. So it wouldn't really be fair for me to comment on that. I also haven't played it. I don't really find the bot particularly compelling. If I were to play it too, I'd probably leave it out, but I think it'd be left a little wanting. So like it wants to be 3 or 4 probably. The 5-player game was fine. I actually thought it would be horrible downtime. Again, though, we were all very deep in the hobby, the 5 of us that played it, and we had beers. So, that probably made up for any downtime issues the game might have suffered from. But I just don't want to teach it. I don't want to teach it to anyone. It's so much. And not only is it so much, but it's your whole afternoon. So, that's I think its biggest drawback. This is a huge event game, and either you have to do a really big teach up front, or people have to just go away and learn it and be prepared to do that homework.
Yeah, I mean it's almost half a point heavier than Dwellings of Eldervale, and actually most people rate it heavier than that. Even like so, 59% of people rate it a weight of 4 on Board Game Geek, whereas 61% of people rate it a 3 on Dwelling.
Yeah,
I think that's quite a bit extra to add to a game. I feel Dwellings of Eldervale was quite straightforward to pick up, but worth noting that's a 2020 game that I only played for the first time last year.
Yeah, I think Dwellings is somewhat simpler. I mean, this is very, very similar, right? Like we discussed it on the other
Mm.
podcast. You know, there is some amount of streamlining here, but there's also just a lot more going on. You know, and I said at the time that actually Terra Mystica and Gaia Project were a very strong parallel, albeit very different games, but just the way they relate to one another feels very um very similar to the way Dwellings relates to Andromeda's Edge.
Well, I've not played Andromeda's Edge, but yeah, like it looks like there's a lot more.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's accurate. But there just seems to be a lot more going on in different areas of the board that I didn't have to think about in Dwellings.
I suppose, like, you know, but it's just little things. Like, now there's different kinds of buildings, but they don't add that much extra. They just relate to different tracks. You know, in Dwellings, like, the buildings aren't tied into the magic rondel. You know, and in this, they're all
add enough
kind of
little things
interconnected. Yeah, well, like, that's exactly what I mean. Like, it's hard to pinpoint the sort of the one thing that makes it more complex. It's not like there's a whole new mechanism or a whole new board or anything. It's just all of the sort of interworking mechanisms have all these little extra intricacies and interactions that makes the whole prospect more complex overall. But you know, having said that, like, I'd say Dwellings is a pretty sort of hobbyist game, and I'd say this is, you know, even more hobbyist. You know, if hobby concepts are foreign to you or you've not played that many board games, then this is going to seem completely impenetrable. But, you know, I can see why for people who play a lot of board games, this is become a sort of a fan favorite, because it's got so many sort of levers to pull and buttons to push and things to spin that it's just incredibly compelling, you know. But if you're the kind of person that wants, after the play, to come away and think, that was a really close game, and here were my strategic mistakes, and this is what I'd do better next time, and, you know, I'd like to try that other strategy, I'm not sure, you know. And so for like a sort of a 4 hour prospect, you know, you might feel disappointed that you didn't get that kind of experience. On the other hand, you know, and again, like, it's also not like the kind of game that's got these sort of incredible stories coming out of it. Like, there are sort of moments of sort of cool interactions, you know, like, here's the big battle where, against all odds, somehow Barry defeated both me and the NPC ship, which nobody thought would be possible, but he just rolled 3 6s, which was amazing. And that's cool. Like, I like those moments. I could also see, if you were sort of really keen on, you know, sort of strategy and reward, then that kind of combat might be frustrating to you. But, you know, I like that the players always sort of have a chance. You know, none of the combats feel like a completely foregone conclusion. It always adds some tension and some excitement, which is welcome, especially when some of the turns can be very much just someone quietly triggering their tableau, you know, one piece at a time. But what I mean is, you know, I talked already about Blighted Reach and the sort of emergent narrative in that. If you've played Station Fall, you'll know sort of about these sort of, or like Nemesis, you know, about these sort of ludonarrative, sort of emergent narratives, you know, not rote, but coming out of the interactions of the different game elements. And this doesn't really have that, you know. It's €2 for that stuff. But, you know, it, as far as the sort of the Euro buttons and levers go, it's very satisfying to sit and press them and see sort of what happens and what you can contrive, you know. And it does feel great when you get that building out and you get a big payoff.
Fair enough, fair enough. Well, hopefully I'll get a chance to play it, perhaps sometime before 2028. But no
yeah,
guarantees.
Find someone that knows it really, really well, Barry, because you're not going to sit down and learn this one from the rulebook.
I'll watch a rules video before I sit down to it. Well, my last game for 2024, the sort of things that I think stood out and ones that I anticipate playing well into this year. A game I did mention before, and a game that I managed to play at BarryCon in particular, but that is Bomb Busters. This is a game from Pegasus Spiel and Hisashi Hayashi designed. So this is a cooperative game where you are defusing bombs. It is a game of logic, deduction, and sort of hidden information, where every player has a sort of a rack of tiles numbered 1 through 12, laid out in order, and the other players have to cut your wires by revealing 2 wires of the same value, and that can be from one from their rack of wires and one from your rack of wires, or both from theirs, however that kind of works. And throughout the game you unlock special power-ups, and there's certain things you've got to hit in order. There's trick wires, there's a few things that go on there, and everybody that I've sat down and played this with walked away thinking, oh yeah, that was really good. I had a really good time with that. I want to play it more, and I want to get into the I don't know if it's a campaign as such, but there's sort of a scenario based 66 scenarios within the box that change the base rules slightly. You unlock more powers, I imagine. I'm not there yet. And do a few different things. So I've actually never played this beyond the full base game, which you've just got, everybody's got the same powers, and you're working towards defusing the bomb that has the sort of single yellow or 2 yellows and 1 red wire that you don't want to cut, because that would signal game over and you would blow everybody up. You can make some mistakes. There's a track that will let you make some mistakes, so it's not the kind of game that has to be perfect, but it is better if you get it right. And I hope to at some point sit down for a number of sessions of this and play through as many of the scenarios as people will put up with. It is a deduction and logic game, which I very much enjoy. As I mentioned, my most played game of last year was Shipwreck Arcana, which is another logic and deduction game. And I can see this going up in my estimate as long as these scenarios continue to shake up the game in a way that makes it interesting to play repeatedly. But even the base game's fun.
Nice.
So I imagine Inventions, Bombbusters get a good review next year, whereas Deep Sea Endeavour, we'll see.
And Andromeda's Edge will probably live and die based on how often I was able to get it to the table.
Fair. But what have you got from... But obviously the bulk of this podcast should hopefully be the games from 2023, the ones that we've had time. We've played more of the games from 2023. We've maybe got additional plays of some of these games in. What have you enjoyed? What have you not included in your best games of 2023?
Yeah, I've got my notable exceptions list, because I think, so I've chosen not to include things that are just expansions, things that are reprints of earlier games, or things that are very close reimplementations. And so, stuff like Black Rose Wars Rebirth, which is is it a reimplementation of Black Rose Wars? Is it an expansion? It's actually both.
Right.
I've not included that. And of course, Castles of Burgundy Special Edition, which does have new gameplay in it that's not present in Castles of Burgundy without the Special Edition, but I'm also not going to include that. But if I did, it would be here in this list.
Similarly, I've excluded a few games for a number of reasons. To give you 2023 stats, I played 72, or I have now played 72 games that were released in 2023. And my honourable mentions would have been Ticket to Ride Legacy. I didn't play it till 2024, played all 12 games within January, and it was probably the best 12 games I've played in 2024, so that would have made the list. But I'm never going back to it, so does it count? Perspectives, which I spoke about on the channel before, is a cooperative, like an investigation deduction type game. Loved it. Maybe one of the best gaming experiences of last year. Played it at the Games Expo, all three sort of cases. And I was noting in Paul Grogan's roundup for the year that he says the second box is even better, or second box is better. Didn't seem like he had a lot of fun with the first one, but I find that hard to believe because box one was so great. I would have definitely had Castles of Burgundy Special Edition in there because it's perhaps the best board game ever.
Yeah.
But it is effectively a reprint. Another reprint that I've only just kind of got to grips with is 51st State Ultimate Edition. I did previously own New Era before it got this update, but it is just a collation with a little expansion. But this game is very much my kind of fiddling with cards in a tableau, which I love. I've got a lot of these. Legacy of You, which I only played this year again as well. It would be my best solo game of 2023. Played it all the way through, sort of 12 campaign games and a few extras. But again, there's no reason to go back. There's no end game in it that's going to make me want to keep going back and keep playing it. I had a really good time with it while I was playing it, but there's not enough for a standalone go back and see if you can beat your score, go back and see if you can unlock the next thing. So no reason to add that as the best game. And then Nucleum and Septima, I only played once, but I had a really good time with them. I know you didn't get on with Septima as much as well as I did.
Yeah, it's only one play, and it's something that I would be sort of interested in revisiting at least one more time. But
yeah.
I don't anticipate my next play being particularly better. Nucleum, on the other hand, I do really enjoy.
Yeah. So having only played both of them once, I don't feel like I can necessarily include them in the best games of 2023. But,
I mean, that makes sense. And, I really like Nucleum, but the reason it's not in my list is particularly because the theme is so abstract. It is like sort of peak Euro action optimization, points optimization, system mastery, which is something, when it comes to these sort of puzzles, and there is enough player interaction in this puzzle to, keep me interested. When the puzzle's very solo solitaire type puzzly, I tend to lose interest, but this one has enough going on the board and the timing and the using of resources and people sort of when they're doing the king's turn and reclaiming their stuff. There's a lot going on here. I find it all very compelling and very interesting, but it's too thematically abstract to sort of establish itself as excellent. But as a system to sort of play around with and master, and as a compelling puzzle, I do think it's excellent.
Nice. So what did make your top games of 2023?
Yeah, I think this is probably going to come as a bit of a surprise to people. Am I going to start with the honorable mention? I feel it's only in here. Well, I've got 2 for my top games. You've got 3. My honorable mention is Dune Imperium Uprising, just because it was my most played game of 2023. Yeah, I've talked a lot about Dune Imperium on the channel, so there's not really much
Great game
to go back into it. Yeah, I think a lot of I think what people are probably most interested in, because Dune Imperium, by now you've probably had a chance to play it. You've probably got some impression of whether or not you like the game, and you might be thinking, well, what about the original core set? What about the expansions? What should I do? So that's sort of the angle I sort of take on it. Like Dune, I mean, I stick by what I said in the very first live stream I did of Dune Imperium Solo. I do think my first impressions were pretty on point. Although I got to say, I am surprised by the competitive movement that's emerged around the base game. And I do think, that is reasonable, because there is, I do think that the game does have enough luck and chance in it that can be a determining factor amongst players of equal skill. But I do think that there's so much potential skill and sort of tactical decision making during the game that I can see that why it's become a very competitive, a very compelling competitive experience for people. That's getting, and I think if you want to play it that way, it's like the original base game, is probably still the best to do. I don't think that the expansions necessarily improve the competitive experience, but maybe people who are super into that will disagree with me. And they're probably right because I've not played it that way at all, really. Um, and to that point, I prefer Uprising to the original base game. I find that, the original base game had some issues within the sort of calculatable opening moves, and the competitive game became a lot about understanding what those rote opening moves were and countering them, or figuring out like how you can pivot to something else to get equal value or thwart someone that was going down that route. There's a lot of sort of like understanding where am I sat in turn order and which of the base game characters am I going to take based around that. And I do think also like some of those base game characters are just vastly superior to others.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Uprising necessarily sort of solves all these problems, and I'm not sure if you'd want to, right? Because, as I say, it's a game that has sort of a lot of luck in it. And actually, what it's got as well is a lot of the victory points that you earn during the game are couched within this sort of like quite achievable thing. Like, I think you have to be playing quite poorly not to get at least sort of 5 or 6 victory points. Or you have to be trying some really sideways strategy. That's less true, actually, in Uprising, where earning the influence is harder, the influence of the different factions. But, people do talk about Uprising also have rote openings, particularly the worms, getting influence with the Fremen so that you can get into the siege chamber, so that you can get the maker hooks, so you can go to the desert and start deploying the worms. That's more steps. So it's more telegraphed, I think, so therefore it's more thwartable.
Mm-hmm.
Also, depending on the fall of the combat cards, you may not be able to capitalize on it, depending on when the shield wall falls or if it falls and when those combat cards come out. Having said that, that's more random. That's more luck, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the worms are also a bigger gamble because the reward is potentially huge. I really like that mechanism, but I can see why people might find that too swingy. Um, I also like how the combat cards have the sort of matching effect for points in Uprising. So it sort of encourages people to go in on certain combats, and you can gauge the worth of those to different players in a way that in the core game, all of the combats are kind of equal value to everyone. Um, so you kind of, it's so, you've got a little bit more incentive at different times that sort of throws a spanner in the works. But, I've written here my favorite way to play the game, and I'm sure I've talked about this on the podcast a bunch of times, but so I'll just very quickly summarize, is Uprising with both expansions. And that's primarily because of so I really like the deck building aspect of the game. I'm often the person that sort of loses out early on because I'm spending too much time futzing with cards and trying to lead my deck out. Sometimes it works, sometimes it works great, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. But that's where my fun is. So I like Immortality because it adds the extra marketplace of cards. Um, Sometimes the flop is bad or expensive, and then that's just sucks, and Immortality might as well not be there because I do
Mm-hmm.
think the tracks are just more that they're not necessary. Like the science track and stuff. That's a little bit unnecessary, but you can't really have one without the other, so be it. But I really like the immortality cards, so I include that. And then with the Rise of Ix, I just like the dreadnoughts. I like them as a counter to the worms. They're not a direct counter, obviously, but they're a way to get combat power, and the fact that they like never die, is a way of rewarding you for going down that path. They're actually also more acquirable than the worms, so if you can see someone's going down that route, you can acquire the dreadnoughts. And so if you need to stop someone from winning a battle with worms, you can have some footing there. And obviously the worms will still duplicate rewards if you're in second place. So it's kind of a way of balancing it out, right? Like the person with dreadnoughts comes in and beats you, and then their dreadnoughts don't die. Your worms die, but you still get double rewards for second place or whatever. Um, so I think that's I like that sort of balancing effect. I also like the technologies as a sort of mini tableau building element. I think those are good. I could probably do without the trading track. It's not, I think it's a little bit too strong, but again, you can't have Rise of Ix with techs and dreadnoughts without the trading track. So that's the way it is. Um, but I think Uprising has a more balanced Imperium deck, which I appreciate. And when I play, I pretty much only play with the Uprising characters, the cards from Uprising and the expansions. So I don't include any cards from the base game at all. And I don't include the characters from the expansions either, actually, just the Uprising base game. So it did a lot for me. So that's my honorable mention.
Fair enough, although it goes against everything you chose not to include. Close re-implementations, expansions, and reprints.
Yeah, well, that's why it's an honorable mention, because and the only reason I mentioned it at all is because it was my most. Actually, it's not true. Technically, this is my most played multiplayer game of 2023.
Spoilers for what's coming up, or hints at what's coming up, I guess. I've actually not played Uprising. I enjoyed Dune Imperium. Had I played Uprising, it might have made the list. But as is, it did not. So we'll see what the new year brings and whether I can get some more Dune Imperium in whatever form in. Looking at the sort of games I've picked for the best of 2023, I think actually 2024 was a stronger year overall for games that I really loved than 2023 was. I've not had a look back at 2022 to see, but there's still there was a lot of good games, fewer great games. So make of that what you will with some of my rankings here. In third place, I'm going to put a game that I received through Kickstarter very early on in the year. A game that we played at least once together, I think, and that is Shogun no Katana. That is by Placenta Games or Postscriptum, and designed by a trio of gents who go under the nom de plume of P.S. Martinson and Federico Randazzo. It is set in sort of feudal era Japan. You are a swordsmith creating katanas both for your customers and for the emperor as well. You have to go, it's a worker placement style game where you go gather your resources, get your various bits and pieces for scoring points, train up your artisans to make the nicest hilt, the best blades for your swords, and convert them into katanas, which you then fulfill the contracts by making these swords. Now, the only real unique thing about Shogun no Katana is the forging of the swords. It has a small mini game where you have a forge and you're adding ingredients, effectively resources, to your sword to move it along the track until it is complete. You can have really any number of swords being developed at the same time, but they can never be on the same space. And every time you add a resource, it moves either left to right or up and down, and they can't be together. So there's a sort of spatial element to when you're creating these swords, these katanas. But that mini game element and the nature of having to plan it out, the forethought and what I can activate all of these swords at once, they're not going to clash with each other, they're all going to move forward, and I'll be closer to fulfilling those contracts, is enough of a unique element for me to keep it and to rate it. Actually, the collection of contracts and resources and all that you can see in many games, but this small, or not small element, but this main element of the game where you're creating these swords is fun, and there's combo potential for what you can do and bonuses for using different types of workers, monks versus your normal guys. It's hard to hold it as best of anything, right, within genre, but it is solid, and this spatial forging is interesting enough for me that I would keep going back to it to play it. I don't know what you thought of it when we played. You probably thought it was okay, but
yeah, I remember. I enjoyed the theme. I liked the sort of, and as you say, it's sort of worker placement, it's contract fulfillment, it's a lot of sort of very familiar mechanisms. I don't remember if there's any novelty around the worker placement. I feel like there wasn't there like sort of first in gets better benefit or something?
No, so the one area, so there's different areas you can go to, and
Mm-hmm.
you place some of your workers go to the palace, and then they're better. The more you have of them there, the more you get.
Mm-hmm.
Some of your workers have to go and train up. Uh, Basically, just points engine for when you do lacquer, you get more points because your artisans are better at it. There's
Right.
another area where you go and pick up the contracts, and then there's like the marketplace. And I
So it's
don't know if we played with any of the expansions. I think the expansions are necessary just to elevate it out of the
mm,
humdrumness of, well, you've seen all this before. Just to the little bonuses. There's different people, and when you go to a spot, they move, and so it changes the value of each spot depending on where these well, not merchants, but like these wanderers are, and what you can get from the different spots. So you're always changing the value of an action, which is another interesting element. But again, a number of games do something similar. But the real crux of it is the making the swords and just being able to
mm-hmm.
to get them out the door and fulfill those contracts, because sometimes it can be quite tight to do so. And then similarly, those contracts, you're improving your skills for making the Shogun's katana at the end,
Mm-hmm.
where you want to have the best katana for the objective scoring at the end of the game type thing. But
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would think it was less than fine. But I think if you don't enjoy the puzzling element of moving these swords through your forge, and on occasion you'll clash, and you'll be like, oh, I can't do that because they're there, so I need to get a bonus action to move that out of the way first by doing something different, and then I can do what I want to do. Um, it's tight on the number of workers you've got. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and as you say, the theme's pretty solid and a little different from most other games.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I remember. And yeah, the forging of the swords, like you say, it's a sort of geometrical puzzle. It's giving you some, puzzly timing considerations to take into account.
That was my third place for 2023.
Well, I guess I'll do my second place. And I didn't really rank these in any particular order, and that's partly also because they're wildly different games. But I guess the first one I'll talk about is La Famiglia, The Great Mafia War, which is published by Furlenspiel and Capstone Games and designed by Maximilian Maria Thiel. And this is a game, it's very, very competitive. It is, I suppose, at its most base, it's area control and hidden information. It is only 4-player. There is now a 2 and 3-player module expansion, which I have picked up. I picked up at Essen this year, but I haven't had a chance to play it. So as far as I'm concerned, it's only 4 players, and it's 2v2 team game. And in the game, you are taking control of, or you are acting in the role of mob bosses in Sicily in the 1980s during the great Mafia war in Sicily at the time. And I suppose I should address that theme first, because the game itself is this sort of area control, hidden information, sort of very logistically challenging action selection system game, which really doesn't do very much. I mean, the theme is there, but the way the theme manifests is very much sort of like 2 teams fight. It could have probably been more appropriate to generals on either side of World War II or something like that, because you are 2 distinct mob bosses on each team, and you can't really collaborate fully because all information that you discuss is open, but a lot of your information is hidden. So you can tell your partner what you're going to do, but then everyone will know what you're going to do, and that can't be allowed. So my understanding of the actual history of this is that, one, it was incredibly violent and resulted in a lot of civilian death. And two, part of the reason why it was so violent, other than that it was intensely vicious, was that it was incredibly difficult to work out who was on which side, not only because people's allegiances were very opaque, but also because everyone, they looked indistinct, right? I mean, obviously the cops were quite distinct from the mafia, but even then, like, who was working with who, what factions they were a part of, it's not like they wore uniforms, right? And a lot of people were just sort of civilians that were getting caught up in this confusion. And none of that's really well represented in the game. So I feel like it's quite a potentially very affecting subject matter for people, particularly if you've got firsthand experience of this. It was 40 years ago or so, a little bit more than that. So, there probably are many people alive today who like board games who may well have had experience of this conflict or have been affected by it. And I don't think the game necessarily addresses that in a very delicate way. A lot of the relationships between the different factions and stuff is presented in a very Euro game way. Um, you know, Case in point, like there is boat tokens which kind of look like they've come out of GTA Miami Vice. Um, and maybe that was, and it's just a very sort of flamboyant stylistic choice. Um, and also you can curry favor with the local church and with the police, and if you do, it helps you with your logistics and managing things. But my understanding is that that was not really going on, and also the sort of the way the way in which that you sort of you just kind of move up a track, right? It's just a sort of a very Euro-esque abstraction of something that was incredibly complex. So, heavy caveat, thematically heavy caveat on the front of this, because obviously I really, really liked the game. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here in my list. But I'm conscious that I don't have any personal affiliation with this. I don't have any personal experience of it. I wasn't affected by it. So I'm looking at this largely as a sort of a war gamer and as a logistics sort of a person that likes this sort of logistical puzzle, and restricted information, restricted communication type game. All of these things are well within my wheelhouse. They're things I really, really like. This is quite a unique configuration of those elements, which is what appeals to me about it. But, personally, I'm quite far removed from this conflict, which I think could have been very affecting for some. So, having said all of that, the game itself, is a series that it's the island of Sicily, and it's divided up into territories, and you and your teammate, and again, like, it doesn't really make sense that you're two mafias allying, and felt it feels during the game a bit like you should be able to stab each other in the back or betray people, but that's just not what the game is, but there's a thematic disconnect there. So it does seem like an odd choice thematically, but anyway, enough on that. You are allied with your teammate. You're trying to control 6 of the territories on the island of Sicily, or if one of you controls 5 of them, then you also win. So you're trying to get these territories, and you're setting up all these different logistics, which is going to be drugs, sort of drug factories that are producing revenue for you. And you're going to be taking actions from this big tableau of actions on the board. And there's sort of like an area control element to the action board as well, because there's different sort of spots and slots that you can slide around in. And if somebody's team gets all the spots, they get some kind of bonus. I'm trying to remember exactly how it works. It's been a little while since I played this, but I just remember that action selection system being very, very important. And then you've also got these order tokens that are sat in front of you, and these are hugely crucial. It's the kind of thing where you actually get little menus with the game that show you everybody's order tokens, because there's actually like, even though you only play with 4 mafias, I think the game comes with 6, and they're very asymmetrical. They're reasonably asymmetrical. They're all fundamentally doing the same core stuff, putting out troops, moving troops around, building more factories, building boats, building cars, or acquiring cars. But the skill with which they do these different things varies quite greatly. The ease of which they can access things varies quite greatly. So they do feel quite distinct and characterful. You've got this menu of order tokens, and you start with all these basic ones, and they're all quite similar across the different factions. But different factions open up more, but you open up more order tokens as you sort of upgrade. And that's a part of this action selection system. If you're doing it well, you're going to get to upgrade your order tokens, you're going to get to upgrade your standing with the police, you're going to get to upgrade your affiliation with the church, and this gives you more sort of stuff. So doing those upgrades is important, but it will come at the cost of effective actions now. So there's always that trade-off, right? And you and your partner are trying to sort of silently infer what each other would like most to do. Because if you communicate openly, people will know what you're doing and they can kind of work against you. But the order tokens themselves are then the core of the round-to-round play, because what you're doing is you're effectively hiding them behind your screen and putting them out face down onto the board. And then players are going to flip the order tokens face up in player order, and the tokens might just be recruit a bunch of troops. Well, it's a bit more complicated. You have to get the troops behind your board and then put them out. But, the point is, you might put out a bunch of troops, you might move the troops around, you might do an attack, you might build a new drugs den, you might build a new boat, which lets you get around the island more easily. You can, build up this network of boats that can let you scoot around and potentially get behind someone's sort of defenses, if you're focused on that strategy, which is quite effective. And so it's, you don't know what order tokens your ally has put out. So you can see them put a token out, and then you're trying to guess what they're going to do, and maybe you're going to hope to play off of that. But, they could tell you, but it's like that sort of like, how much do I want to reveal to my opponents? They might just say like, I've got this, or I'm going to play really aggressively. There's no strict restriction on what they can say. They can talk as openly as they want. However, they can't really.
Yeah.
It depends how effective you think your opponents are going to be at countering that stuff. So overall, like as this sort of logistical moving things around, how do you deploy, because you can, you can develop these car bombs. Like cars can be used for driving your troops around, and then they give you sort of combat benefits, and then they can be rigged up with explosives and just blow up whole territories. And how you use those and deploy those, again, really, really important to the strategy of the game, but sort of, again, relying on this imperfect information. And I think that's just what really appeals to me about the game and what I enjoy. I like these sort of games of where the mistakes are really human and come from the players, and I like games that play into that, like hidden information. And this is particularly compelling because it's got so much hidden information, but despite the amount of stuff it hides, it feels like you could work it out. It's just on the cusp of being worked out. And then sometimes you'll be like, yes, we did it. We got it. We were on the same wavelength and we've done it. And sometimes you'll be like, oh my God, I didn't, that's not at all what I thought was going to happen. Or like my opponents just deployed like 5 troops to this territory. They're clearly going on a big offensive, and then they don't, and they do something completely different. You're like, wait, what? So it's just I think a very compelling puzzle, which I really enjoyed. And,
yeah,
and quite unique.
Apart from you having spoken about this before, I've never seen, I think I saw a copy in Leisure Games once, but that's the only other time I've seen this. Nobody's talked about it. Nobody's not seen it anywhere else. and obviously theme aside, looks interesting to play. Like, I don't think I've got any other games that are sort of a team game of this ilk, where you're trying to work with somebody without communicating directly or openly what you're trying to do. So I'd be interested in giving it a go.
Well, obviously, Guards of Atlantis 2 is up there in my top 5 that we talked about at the beginning of this very show. And there is, in terms of working with your teammate and being limited in communication, there is that similarity across the two games. But the actual, I mean, obviously, Guards has a variable player count, and the actual gameplay is entirely different. But that sort of vibe of being on a team with someone, but not being able to fully communicate with them. And I think to an extent, it might be the same kind of vibe that Gloomhaven was trying to capture, but it's just not clear enough about what you can and can't discuss in Gloomhaven, really.
Fair enough. Although, are there things you specifically can't say?
No. You can say as much as you want.
It's a little different.
Yeah,
so
it's really like all about reading that moment of, could I just be completely transparent here? If I am, can my opponents thwart me? But the actual game, and I might not have done a great job of conveying just sort of how much is going on in this action selection system. But it is tricky to discern what is safe to disclose and what is not safe to disclose.
Yeah.
So you often want to err on the side of caution, but if you do, it might very much limit what you can achieve. So, it's just a really, I think, very compelling thing. I'm sure that people who want to be able to fully collaborate would find this quite frustrating, but I think it overall leads to a sort of a more interesting experience, particularly because the actual core gameplay is very much sort of like area control, like sort of a classic area control Euro game, albeit there is a face down card play element to the combat as well. So when you're resolving a fight, you've got just 3 cards, and it really is not unlike the shark and the octopus in Kelp. I'm going to play that, but then you're going to play that, but then I'm going to play this. But obviously on a smaller scale, and there's many, many conflicts, and you get all your cards back each conflict. So yeah, there's just a little bit of sort of rock, paper, scissors there as well to add a little bit of extra spice when you're doing an actual combat.
Nice. I finally won as the shark last night playing Kelp. I was still pretty close, but I knew where he was and got him.
And did it raise the game in your estimation?
No, not really. I mean, it could have come down to, not that we're talking about Kelp necessarily. That'll have to be in perhaps next year's. I bought an upgrade as the shark that let me get rid of one of the 3 confrontation cards. I managed to finally get a bite in, just as, you get towards the end of the life track as the shark. I got a bite in, it was 50-50, lost it. I needed to get another bite in to win, and I had to... If it was still a 50-50 shot for that last bite, it might have been interesting, but the conclusion of the game coming down to whether you picked one of 2 cards and I picked the same or the matching one is somewhat uninteresting. At least this time it was deterministic and it was done by my plays, which was good, but it's equally that upgrade could have never come up. It could have been a 50-50, and if I didn't win, I died, and if I got it, I won. It seems like it could be, that's really exciting when it comes down to that last dice roll or whatever. But is it? I don't know. So my number 2 game of 2023 is a game that I didn't play until 2024, but it is a head-to-head 2-player card game, and that is 7th Sea City of 5 Sails. Can also be played multiplayer, 4-player, or 3-player. But ostensibly a head-to-head 2-player card game, which is my jam. I play a lot of these. So this is published by Pinebox Entertainment and various designers over the years, because this is a re-implementation of the original 7th Sea collectible card game So similar to FFG's reboot of Legend of the Five Rings, L5R, or even Pinebox's own Deadwood, which was like a Western themed card game. So I play a lot of 2-player card games. Last year, going lose count of how many I played. Universus, Lorcana. We played every old FFG LCG. So Call of Cthulhu, Warhammer Invasion, Conquest. We didn't get around to Star Wars. That was the only one I think we didn't manage to get a game in.
Star Wars Unlimited.
No, Star Wars living card game.
Ah.
So for a game, for a card game to stand out for me, it has to really be doing something different and stand, apart from every other card game that I've played. So, and this does. The interesting elements, there's a bit more back and forth than, say, something like Magic the Gathering, where you do kind of your thing, your opponent might counter it or block you from doing what you want, but it's quite binary overall whether your thing's going to go through or not. Whereas in 7th City of Five Sails, cards tend to be multi-use. They can be played for like an event, or they could be played as part of a duel. So there's an area movement element for the game, which doesn't exist in a lot of other 2-player card games I play. And you're trying to control 3 separate areas or defeat the opponent's. There's multiple paths to victory. So you're trying to control all the areas of the city, or you're trying to defeat the opponent's leader twice, I think, a bit like Conquest. And it's action back and forth, so it's not like I do all my stuff, you do all your stuff. There's much more interaction. Cards can be multi-use, but if I'm attacking you, you can start using cards to have a back and forth combat. I'm doing 4 wounds to you, but you can parry 2 of them away, you can block 1 of them, and you can send 2 back with your riposte. And then I have to come back in on the defensive and then hopefully get back on the attack until somebody can't do something or chooses not to do something, and then they take the wounds on that character. Which is really interesting. Your leaders and your characters have different stats, and that's both their combat ability, their persuasion ability for hiring new characters over to your side, because the game itself has cards that you can earn during play. And there's just a lot going on. It's pretty interesting overall, and does enough different that makes me want to play more. The only real downside to it at the moment is there's not a huge amount of cards, and that means there's not a lot of deck building, or construction, I should say, for that one. So this is a constructed deck game, and the more options you have for building your decks, the more variety there is, and the more unexpected things can come up when you're playing against your opponent. I'm not super deep into the game where things are boring at the moment. I've got sort of 5 decks that can be made up simultaneously. And next year, or this year now, there should be an expansion which also moves forward the city deck. So as I mentioned, there are cards you can earn that the game puts out. And this has an ongoing story where you'll be replacing certain cards from that deck with the new version. And that could be a character has moved into a certain affiliation, so they're no longer in the city deck, but they're now one of the factions cards that they can put into their deck for construction. Or maybe one of the things you can find at a location. Maybe the story says that one of the factions has their Fabergé egg or whatever, right, stolen, and you're able to pick it up and you're able to use it to pay for cards on your side or something if you're able to fence it or sell it. Things along those lines. But basically the deck evolves, so you're not always seeing the same cards in the middle, as well as not always seeing the same cards with who you're playing with, as long as there's a bit more variety in the deck construction. There only seems to be like a couple of decks that are top tier at the moment, so I'd be interested in more cards to increase the the high level play. Not that I'm really at high level play, but eventually you get there.
So is the city deck something that's in the game when you play the game?
Correct, yeah. So you come with your deck, your opponent comes with their deck, and the city deck is like it's static for whatever you're playing. But every Gen Con or whatever, there's updates to the city deck, and you can either print them off yourself or you can wait for the official decks to be released, which is what's going to happen this year. And a little bit like you've probably not played it, but the Call of Cthulhu game from FFG. There's a story deck, and there was multiple story decks released throughout the years of the game, and you would always play tournament level at least with the most up-to-date story deck version.
Right, so these are sort of like, for want of a better term, variable battlefields to play on.
Yeah, well, like the battlefields are fixed, but the cards that come out are different. So at the start of every round, you're basically dealing a card to each of the areas that you can compete over, and you'll be like, well, actually I need another guy on my crew, so I'm going to go to the docks to hire him, or I need a weapon, so I'm going to go to the marketplace to buy the sword, and then part of the game is competing over what comes out, and part of the game is fighting the other person, as well as trying to control those areas as well. So that there's a deck of cards that is from the game that is thick enough that
I sort of misspoke when I said battlefields. I guess what I mean is like I'm learning that you've got locations and you're going to take different actions at these locations as well as fighting your opponent.
Yeah.
And that the game will be adding elements. So I guess what we're saying really is that there's an amount of the game's landscape that's controlled by the game itself, and that's variable once these more cards are released.
Yeah, and to make sure it's not like overwhelming, cards are replaced rather than just added to, and it's part of the story. I don't care so much for the story, but
obviously that could massively appeal to someone who's into it. But also you could feasibly, like if you were like, no, I prefer the very first story deck, you could just go back and do that, right?
Yeah, you don't have to burn the cards when you get the new ones or anything.
Yeah, you don't have to tear them up.
Yeah, you can always just go back and play whatever version.
No, they'll only send you the new ones if you send back the old ones first.
There's definitely been things like that in the past, back in the 90s in particular. You would send things in to get things back. But
Well, I'm glad we've moved on past that. But this sounds very intriguing. I'd certainly be interested in having a game if I got the chance.
Yeah, it's moderately involved. It's not too hard to play if you've played other competitive head-to-head card games. Unless you want to start getting deep into the deck construction elements and no, so you can. The game gives you some, but I've tweaked the decks with what limited tweaking can be done, but the more variety there, because for example, Arkham Horror, the card game, or Marvel Champions, the card game, which are co-op games, so slightly different. I never really liked to begin with because there's so little variety in what decks you can build. And as more and more things have come out, it has become a much more interesting, or both of those have become much more interesting games for me. And I imagine that 7th Sea, 5 Sails will be the same when there's a stronger element of uniqueness to what decks you can build.
Mm-hmm. Well, sounds intriguing. So I guess we'll leave your final choice for later because I too have played it, so we can discuss it together.
Sure
actually,
thing.
I think you've played my next one as well, haven't you?
Not yet. Because the reprint's not yet delivered, I don't think.
No, it is not. This is a review copy that I was given by the publisher. I did buy a bunch of extra stuff for it. My top game of 2023 is so out of character. Not only is it a game that I played entirely solo, it's a deck construction game, which I genuinely don't like. So this has got to be good, right? If it's so out of character to be not only a game that I finished, but a game that made my top of 2023 list. And in the end, when I was trying to decide what should have been my best game of the year, this one made the list not only because I played it the most of any game I played that year, because it is a number of sessions. I think I played it 31 times in total. But after I finished it, there were some loose ends, and I went back and I 100%ed it because I liked it so much and I just wanted to keep living in that world. And I think that's the key sort of takeaway for me for this one. It is Earthborne Rangers, which is published by Earthborne Games. It's designed by Andrew Navarro and helped along with development by the Sadler brothers. Also, Andrew Fisher and Brooks Flaugar-Leavitt are credited as designers as well. I'm not sure how much work everyone's done. I know the Sadlers were largely on sort of development, but of the other three designers, I know Andrew Navarro played a big role, and the others may well have done so as well. But it's come together as Earthborne Rangers, which is a cooperative game. It can be played solo or up to 4 players. You are rangers in a post-apocalyptic world, and it's sort of post-devastating environmental holocaust. So something has happened that has wiped out humanity. Certain traces of a high-tech human civilization still exist within the world, but it is sort of seen as relics of the ancients, and some of it is looked upon with suspicion, and some of it is quite is utilized and regarded. The world is full of animals and creatures that you'd expect. It's largely overgrown and sort of gone back to nature. This was part of, I guess, the attempt to and successful attempt to restore Earth's environment to make it habitable for humans again. And as a result, you've got all these creatures that are man-made. They're human engineered. I say man-made, human made. These sort of human created creatures that are going around and interacting with the environment, trying to restore it. But now their purpose is sort of lost, and they've kind of become integrated into the new environment, the new ecology of Earth. So in this sort of new world, which is where humans are I guess they're the apex predator still, but not really. You are joining a society that exists within the Valley, which is the sort of the conceptual limitations of the game world. But the Valley is made up of a whole ton of different human settlements, and there's a whole sort of culture that's arisen. The culture is generally one of sort of working collaboratively with nature in order to live. There is technology, there's some sort of very sci-fi technology as well, that is being created and developed from the technology left behind by the human predecessors, the ones that have all sort of died out. There's some concept of sort of vaults, which you might, recognize from Fallout, where some people went underground and hid during the worst of the environmental disaster and have since reemerged. But that was quite some time ago, and now people are well established in these, sort of above ground cities. But there's these sort of vast underground networks as well of ancient technology and things that are largely unexplored. There is also some concept of magic, the exact nature of which is not entirely made clear by the game. It is sort of, I guess, psychic manipulation of the world and the world around it, but it does resonate with technology. So these characters called the Shapers, who are sort of the wizard characters of the game, can require technological elements called conduits in order to practice their magic. So it's not entirely non-technological. But the game itself is a campaign game. The core box comes with one campaign. There is a number of what are called like sort of one shots. They call them 1-day campaigns. A day is sort of a single play session. It's usually 60 minutes. It can be sort of 45 to 90, really, depending on how complex the day is. Some days are incredibly short, and some days are much, much longer. The actual campaign itself can be probably resolved anywhere between sort of like 15 and 30 days, really depending on when you trigger certain things and the route you take through it. I won't talk any much more about it because I don't want to spoil it for anyone, especially given that it's the only campaign other than what they've made available on the website, which are these sort of much shorter one-day sessions. There might be more stuff now. It's actually been a little while since I've looked at it. It is a game where you sort of set out, you create your ranger, you've got these sort of different decks that you can pull from when you're creating your character. There's a sort of set of decks called your backstory, and that might be like, sort of a tinkerer who makes things. It might be a survivalist who's sort of all about going out long walks in the, I might be getting these names wrong, but, thematically, you're someone who goes out into nature and survives in nature. So you get to pick one of the, or you might be sort of like a harmonious type character. So you'll pick that backstory, and then you'll pick like a sort of a role, which is like your sort of your current deck, and you'll craft a deck from the cards presented before you. And you've got some amount of, you'll also take a stat card, which gives you the 4 main stats in the game. And some of the cards, even within your chosen backstory and job role, will be gatekept by your stats. So you might have really high spirit, which means you can use lots of really cool spirit cards, but really low willpower. So you have less of those, or perception. So you have less, or you can't access those cards as well. And those stats can never change. Like once you've picked that starting card, you're fixed for the whole game with those stats. So you'll just never be good at that thing. Once you've built that deck, you also get to have access to like one card from somewhere else in the game. It's called your, I can't remember what it's called. It's called like your outside interest or something, And it's just like, go and pluck a card out of someone else's backstory or job deck and shuffle that into your deck, or 2. I think all the cards, all the cards come in pairs, and the deck is like 30 cards. So that might be one of the reasons why I was so able to cope with this, because it's really not a lot of cards, and early on there's very little actual choice, and you're mostly going on vibes. And I'd actually set about playing the game with the anticipation of playing it with someone else on the channel. And that, unfortunately, just timing logistics never worked out, so I didn't get to do that. But I also created the character entirely on vibes. So I picked like a guardian who protects people and is friends with the animals, because I wanted to be peaceful. And I went with like no weapons and really low aggression. There's a whole section, sort of way you can interact with I'm going to say opponents, for want of a better term, because the game is really not violent. But you can sort of, scare things off and fight with things as well. Although you're not just running around murdering things, and you'll never kill people in the game. It's always sort of nature and creatures in the environment. But I didn't put any weapons in the game, everything to do with that stat. I just sacked it off. I was like, no, I'm going to see if I can make my way through this practice round completely peacefully. And actually, once that became my character for the whole campaign. So it didn't stop me from doing well. And actually, I got really attached to that sort of unique element of the character. But once I got into the game itself, it's sort of presented as these sessions, and there's a sort of a core structure of the rules that you have to learn, and then the campaign will sort of trigger on different days. So each session you might have sort of less to do, or you might just be traveling around the valley, in which case you'll get into these sort of like monster of the week style escapades at the different areas you stop in, while you're pursuing this sort of long-term objective. But at the very beginning of the game, you don't really know anything about what's going on. So you're just kind of doing this sort of very basic mission. And I approached it initially with trepidation, because some of the rules were a bit futzy. I had a bunch of questions. The rulebook could have been better. I was finding myself looking at their website a lot to work things out. As I internalized the structure and the rules, that got better. I also wrote up a few very basic player aids for myself that really helped. I still think probably my biggest criticism of the game is that particularly when the campaign or something changes with the rules fundamentally or wants to set things up in a way that's sort of unique to this particular interaction, it doesn't do a great job of communicating. I mean, it does a fine job, and I'm confident that I executed the game almost entirely correctly, or particularly around those. Well, I'm sure I executed the game correctly. Those edge cases, I'm sure I executed 90% of them, 95% of them correctly, but it just, it took me a little bit of rereading and a little bit of like sort of trying to think about what the game was trying to do. It wasn't as simple or straightforward as I would have liked it to be when it was trying to do things a bit differently to the way it normally did them, if that makes any sense. I'm trying to communicate this without spoiling anything.
Yeah.
So I would have liked that to be more approachable, because once I got into the world and started to interact with the characters and the locations and things, I really, really, really liked it. The world appealed to me. The sensibilities appeal to me. It's very sort of like, it's a very optimistic world to live in. And it's a very sort of positive outlook, it's not without its challenges. There's obviously a story here and adversary and things you have to overcome. But, it's just it's just very non-cynical, which just really appealed to me and sort of set it apart from a lot of the things we're playing in, now. I feel like every time something comes out, it's like, oh yeah, it's grim, dark, whatever, and it's just like, sure, I guess, but I've got like, 5 grim, dark games now. And is there a nice world or a positive world that we can play in? And so this world felt sort of magical and intriguing and curious and positive and, just incredibly compelling. And there is a certain amount of repetition. Like, you'll do a lot of traveling. There's a travel deck that sort of seeds creatures into locations and things. That probably could have done with being a bit bigger, because a lot of those cards repeat. And actually, you can take steps to resolve those cards as sort of like side quests, and then they go out of the deck, and then that deck gets smaller, so it repeats more frequently. But also, like, there was sort of a real sort of sense of like continuity as well that came from that. So if it was so big, I was constantly just seeing all of this random stuff, then the world might have seemed less contiguous. And there was something about that sort of contiguousness that made it feel sort of like familiar over the course of the campaign, which I did appreciate. So I don't know exactly the best way to necessarily resolve that. I just observing that there was quite a lot of repeat encounters as well. But when I put the game away at the end, there were a lot of characters that I'd sort of spoken to in the game, that I'd interacted with, that I'd sort of completed missions for, and stuff like that. Because there's this map that you move around, and the locations or the areas on the map that you land in will determine sort of the environment that you're in and things like that. And the environments get sort of more challenging the further away from your sort of home that you travel and things like that. But there's also a storybook that accompanies it. So you're sort of managing this with this sort of adversarial deck that represents the location you're in, which is filled with friends that you might meet and challenges that you might face and environments that you have to overcome. And then there's your deck, which represents all of your power that you've accrued so far. And, power is quite an aggressive term, really. It's just the resources and friends that you've made and things like that. And then there is a storybook, and the storybook will add a lot of flavor text and things like that. And it will also act as a sort of choose your own adventure mechanism as you progress through the world and follow the main plot. And that all worked together really, really well, except occasionally when it didn't, and that was quite frustrating. which was just the choose your own adventure stuff. Like very occasionally I'd be like, oh, I thought this would resolve differently or lead me down a different path. And instead I've circled back to something I've already done. And the core mechanism of the game is the day, which is one run through your deck. So your deck's kind of like your stamina. And once you've got through your 30 card deck, you're tired out for the day and you're just done. And so like and there's a certain amount of stuff, like side quests particularly, you have to resolve the same day. So like I would hope to I would spend a day trying to do something, and then it just wouldn't resolve the way I thought it was going to resolve, or it would just loop me back to some text I'd already read, and I'd be like, oh, come on, man. Like I just assumed that because this was going to be different, there'd be something more to discover here. You know, I was expecting it to say like something else happened, you know, and it didn't. And it just kind of ended and it wasn't very satisfying. So I'm not going to say that the adventure book is like perfectly written because there is some frustration there. But overall, I thought it was very, very good. And I thought, you know, it was compelling enough to take someone that doesn't play solo games and get 31 sessions out of them. Like, I find it hard to give it a more compelling recommendation than that.
No, it sounds good. I certainly one person in our group got the original Kickstarter version, but I wasn't particularly interested at the time. So not that I didn't think it might be a good game. It looked like quite a good game from what I remember, but playing already Arkham Horror, Marvel Champions, both of which are still going, and really I'd love to play more Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. These are all co-op card games of this ilk. Already I didn't really see the space in my life for another one. However, somebody else has bought the reprint, so the new version with the new books, or the new campaign, I think, coming out this year, I guess, if it's not out yet. And they wanted to play with me, and I was like, yeah, alright, fine. Just up the road, so we can probably get games in relatively quick. And so I'll probably see what it's like this year, and whether or not I enjoy it to quite the same degree.
I think, you know, I'll be interested to hear if you enjoy it or not. I think you have to really engage with the world of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's the actual, like the puzzly nature of the actual moment to moment gameplay is reasonably compelling enough. You know, it's largely more about how far you can extend yourself in each day, how much mileage you can get out of the day, rather than, you know, overcoming the challenge in this given moment. Because there's no sort of challenge out there that's just going to kill you and wipe you out. It's impossible to sort of die. What's going to happen is you're just not going to make as much progress as you wanted today. And at some points in the game, that will have negative ramifications. So it's where it's sort of real appeal to, I mean, I really engaged with the lore of the world, the setting of the world I found very compelling. I've talked about that, but you know, I also really enjoyed the sort of the mysteries that would appear. You know, I'd stumble upon some cool thing that I wanted to investigate more, you know, and I'd find some character, or I'd talk to some character that would be like, that say something, and I'd be like, oh, that kind of matches up with what I saw over there. Maybe there's some, you know, connection that I can trigger somehow, you know? So there's a sort of an element of sort of mystery and puzzle solving to figuring the world out, which I found really compelling. And I think that if you're just focused on the puzzly nature of the card play and sort of maximizing sort of your resources or whatever, then it's probably going to be quite disappointing. Overall, I think, like, you know, it is compelling when it needs to be, and also like like there is like sometimes you'll show up at a location and just be like, I just need to move on. So then you spend time shuffling the location deck together, flipping over cards, and actually you get out of there really easily because you've just got the right cards in hand, or the flop of the sort of location deck is quite traversable, and then you have to put it all back and move on to the next location. And it's just like, oh my god, that was quite a lot of faff for, not much. But I was really sort of strict with myself about keeping to those mechanisms and keeping honest with those mechanisms, because there is an element of sort of like almost like role play. I felt like the character just walking through the world, and it sort of immersed me. And then that made me engage more with these sort of like almost like light Sherlock elements, like consulting detective, where you've got to read the clues and sort of put them together. It's not like a sort of Sherlock deduction type thing, but there is sort of hooks and tricks, that like characters will mention something, and then you can go and find that thing. And when that happened, it was incredibly satisfying and cool. Sometimes a character would mention something, and then I'd think I'd found it, and then I'd go back and talk to them, and they're talking about something else, and I was like, oh, okay. But the point is like, but then that's not disappointing, because then you get to go and find out some other mystery, and that's cool too. So I think it really is, a game about sort of engaging with that sort of sense of being there. And I think if that sounds like appealing, then you're going to get a lot out of it, because I think it is a really cool sort of world, and a really it's well realized in the context of a game that's just a bunch of cards and a storybook.
Mm-hmm. Well, next year's roundup might be able to talk about it more.
We'll see. Maybe I'll get the next set by then. I hope so. I'm very, very excited.
Another 31 games to be played.
Oh god, I really want to revisit that world. I've never been so glad to have like the art book, because the art book's actually just a lore book about the whole world, and I read the whole thing. Like, I never do that. And don't get me wrong, like I love story and things. I really like reading, and I like inventive worlds, but I find that a lot of board game stuff's just not very well. But true. This was well written enough, and a very sort of creative and imaginative world, and I found it very engaging.
Nice. Well, top game of 2023 for me left to discuss, and as you say, it's a game that you also have played, and that game is quite different from Earthborne Rangers, but it is Hegemony, and this is a game by Hegemonic Project Games, designed by Vangelis Bagiartakis and Varnavas Tomoteo. Hopefully saying some of that close to correctly. And this is a game that pretends to simulate a nation's economy, where 4 players can asymmetrically play as the working class, the middle class, and the capitalistic class, and a 4th player can take on the state, or the game can play as the state if you only have 3 players, where every player has different wants and needs that they have to manage while scoring the most points, which typically done through economic means of earning capital and producing goods. What's the best way of kind of describing what the game is? It is
it's a highly asymmetrical simulation.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite as asymmetrical as in terms of playing. There's a few different things. So each faction can do something different, or has its own strengths and weaknesses. But on your turn, you're basically just going to play a card. And everybody's deck is different. The actions on those cards are different, have different requirements. They do different things. As the working class, you're looking for jobs. So the middle class, the capitalist class, and the state are aiming to provide you jobs, which you'll then produce goods for. But they go to the middle class and the working class and the state. You just get paid for your labour. The capitalist class is looking to produce goods, import, export, on the market, make money through off the back of the working class, and the middle class straddles the difference there. They can be sort of the management level in their own factories, but they're also looking to hire workers to produce additional goods. All the while, the state is trying to manage everybody so everybody's happy, that the state doesn't go into too much debt, and have the IMF, the International Money, what was it? International Monetary Federation, come in and kind of have to bail them out. And so, yeah, you're right enough. It is asymmetrical. But fundamentally, every turn you're going to be playing a card, either for the action or one of the actions that's on the board, which could be proposing a new bill for everybody to vote on. It could be for raising or lowering tariffs. It could be just pitching a card to sell your goods or move your workers or do a variety of things. You can go on strike if there's not enough jobs. You can refuse to work if you're not getting paid enough. All these kind of things are options in this game. And so it's a heavy economic simulation, right? It's not perfect by any stretch, but a lot of work was done to try and understand how economic systems work within a nation and to model it as best they could, albeit a few assumptions have to be made and a few nuances have to be lost in order to translate it into a game. So this was a game that I didn't know too much about. One of my friends bought it, came round, we played it, and I was like, yeah, I gotta buy this. Like, this is going to be a game that everybody else in my group likes. I'm going to get it, and we're going to play it loads. And that's not strictly true. We've played it a bit, but loads was maybe an exaggeration. I went to UK Expo, Games Expo 2023, picked up a copy there, got all the little expansion bits and pieces, and I've played a few games, enough to have played each of the factions, and then some. And I've seen them all win, but actually I can't remember the middle class winning. I certainly didn't win as the middle class.
I've not seen the middle class win, but I've not played
I've won as the state, I've won as the working class. I did terribly as the capitalist class, and then just middle of the road for the middle class, which maybe makes some sort of sense, I guess.
Simulation's too accurate. No,
yeah,
wait,
exactly.
the Labour class won? Never mind.
No, yeah, that can't be right. It is fairly dry as a game. And I find the more I play it, the more it's interesting, because people get to grips with what you can do as each faction. Because it is asymmetric, the first time you play a faction, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot I could do that, or because that's your special thing you could do, and actually how that impacts the other three people at the table. Assuming you've got a full 4-player game. And so I don't think we've really maximised the potential of the game where everybody's operating all cylinders, knows exactly what they're doing, and how their actions impact the other players at the table in order to force them to do kind of what they want or what you want. It's quite, because it is an economic game and an economic simulation, there's not a lot of super fun combos, super fun, oh, I've done this thing and now I'm going to get all these things. Really, it's like, well, my action is to move the healthcare system to be cheaper, right? That's maybe what you need as the working class. But then, maybe the capitalists become disillusioned because they can't then sell high-priced healthcare to people when they need them, right? So, there are a variety of expansions within the box I've not touched yet. Events decks where you can kind of play through time, or Crisis and Control.
Yeah, I haven't played Crisis and Control, and I haven't looked at the real world events deck
so
either.
There's definitely some more things there which might make it a little less dry, a little less like playing a spreadsheet. It feels like there's a lot more game to explore there. Once everybody knows what they're doing, how it impacts things, once people know their decks, because every deck is different as well as to what kind of actions you can do, I feel like there'd be quite a solid, highly interactive, or more interactive than it seems at the moment. Everybody kind of just does their own thing. But I feel like there is a high degree of interaction that can come out of it once everybody's on top of the game properly. But I think I'm still a number of games away from that. And I think if people don't get good at it at the same pace, you might never get there. And so then I'd want to see how it works with things like the events deck and the sort of extra bits and pieces that I've not played with yet as well. But everybody that I played it with, even if they didn't have a good time, because it's not the most exciting game, appreciated the game for what it was, and we're probably keen to play again, and play a different faction, and play. Nobody came away saying I hate that, I'm never going to play it again, and so it was pretty good. I wasn't upset. I'm very happy I bought it. And as long as I can convince people to keep playing it with me, I think it will be, one of my most played games, broadly, over the years. Something that we keep coming back to.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about. First off, I just want to call out how much I enjoy your characterization of economic classes as factions.
Yeah, listen, it's
everyone's playing a different faction. My faction is the state. But I definitely have. So I think also because I've not played this with a full set, because I've only played this at 4, and I've not played this. I've played it 3 times at 4 players, and I've not played it with a full set of people who've all played before, which would be my sort of first goal to wanting to round out my thoughts as a reviewer. I've said in the past, I think this is a very, very, very clever game, and a very interesting simulation. I'm not sure how good it is as a competitive game experience. And I think that's the sort of what you're describing as well, like wanting to play it with a bunch of people that really understand it. And not being sure if you're actually going to be able to get there. I too feel the same. Although my plays of it have been very different to yours, I think, because we talked about how long it took, for example, and my plays have all been a lot longer than yours. And I don't think that's because necessarily the players are more novice or newer, because I've played with experienced gamers. It's actually because when we've played it, it has become very interactive, with a lot of people going, you can't do that, don't do this, build more of these, and you sort of yelling at each other across the table, albeit without maybe necessarily the full understanding of what they were asking for or what the effects of that would be. But certainly there's certainly been a strong debate around, whether or not the middle class or the capitalist class should be building works for the working class, should be building jobs for the working class, whether or not we should be lowering or increasing the price of education, and whether or not people should be taking state aid or not. And then it gets into the voting, which is it's a 5-round game, and there's voting at the end of every round, and you're going to vote on all those propositions. Should healthcare be free? Should we privatize education? And those voting sessions in my groups have been long and quite heated.
I don't think they've been terribly long, because it's fairly obvious what people were gunning for, and you knew that you would not really be able to persuade them by the time the vote came around. But if you understood what they were gunning for and what you could do to affect that before the vote came up, so in the preceding 3 or 4 actions, for example, that's kind of where I think the game might shine at, like might be, wow, this is really clever. Or it just might be it never gets any better than That's kind of surface level of actually it's just butting heads and do I want the complete opposite of what you want, so we're just going to clash the whole game.
Well, so there is a degree of choosing your battles during the voting stage, because you have a certain amount of influence that you can use, and if you spend it, it's gone. And so if you think something that, because you're 4 factions, right? if you if you think something's going to fly through with little resistance, or um, one person wants it so bad they're going to make sure it goes through without your help, then you can save your influence for a more contentious vote down the line, right? So, I found that the voting tends to be quite heated because people are trying to hold on to their influence without actually having to use it,
Yeah.
rather than because they're debating over what, well, I mean, it's a very binary voting system. So.
Yeah. But I say, like, the working class is never going to want expensive healthcare, because they've got to. One of the ways they kind of level up is by having a whole bunch of healthcare to spend.
It is a little bit more nuanced than that, because I mean,
much.
I agree to an extent. The game is, in its very like high level look at, economic capitalism. It's got 4 policy tracks, and there are 3 steps in each track. They're either left, center, or right. So these broadly align with political positions. So you're either left wing, right wing, or centrist. And the working class want everything on the left, and the capital class want everything on the right, and the middle class want a center balance, right? And the state wants whatever's going to give it voting power, which is a bit more abstract. But if everything goes to the left, then you do run the real risk of the IMF coming in and basically moving everything to the right. So theoretically, the working class wants everything on the left, so long as the state doesn't go bankrupt. And the thing is, the state doesn't necessarily mind going bankrupt. Like, the IMF stepping in for them is not the end of the world, really depending on the board state and what else is going on. So that's where some of the complexities around reading the board state can come in, and also where hopefully the sort of the more interesting skill horizons and interpretations of things can sort of manifest. Because where I think this lives and dies as a competitive game is the broadness of the routes to victory. If there's only one route to victory for each class, and then it's really just about how they can manifest that route to victory every time, it's not actually that interesting. But if there's multiple ways to sort of come out ahead by doing different things, then that's better as a competitive game. It's more interesting. But I guess on the flip side, is it necessarily as accurate a simulation? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, like, certainly, capitalist class, if you can automate your, small amount of production where you don't need to be paying out anything to the working class, and then the working class revolt because there's not enough jobs provided by the state, and you can make the state potentially go bankrupt to swing across to those right-leaning policies which benefit you. Or do you fully open up the market to all 9 factories that you can put down, and then in that last turn sell them all off for profit?
Well, that's where I've seen the capital class do really well. So where I've seen the capital class struggle is where they've tried to avoid paying the working class anything. And then what winds up happening is the working class all go to work for the middle class, who become incredibly rich, and they all go work for the government and vote for left-wing policies. And the capital class winds up not making enough money because they've got only invested in a small number of industries that are automated, but they're expensive to run and they just don't make enough money. Where they've succeeded, the capital class has built a lot of industry, and then in sort of rounds 4 and 5 just sold it all off, creating mass unemployment and huge profit. And if that's their only avenue to victory, then that's quite a sort of narrow scope of strategy for a competitive game. Albeit, they are of course there's going to be attempts to thwart them, and maybe in a more experienced labor class player might anticipate that coming and start to use the striking actions more effectively. I've not seen those used particularly effectively in any game of it that I've played, which is quite a limited number. So I would be interested to see someone get some mileage out of those. So I have some hope that there's more sort of interesting strategic options, but I just haven't seen them manifest yet. But
yeah, I just jumped on the strategy forums. Like, people are still talking about it. How to slow down the middle class. Wait, why is that doesn't seem right.
Well, if there's one thing I've picked up, the only strategy tip I've got is don't let the state player get too much legitimacy. They'll be totally unstoppable if you keep taking all that aid and they get lots of legitimacy.
But I think I said before, but Hegemony is one of the few games where every class has a thread saying how overpowered they are. And if everything's overpowered, then nothing's overpowered,
Yep, that's true. Well, and it's a game that I would be keen to play again. I backed it on Kickstarter or crowdfunding when it was on crowdfunding, and I've got my own copy here with all the bits as well. And
nice.
Yeah, I'd definitely be keen to get some more plays of it in, and particularly with people that have sort of played it before.
That's what I want. Yeah. Instead of having to teach it every time to a new player, having everybody know what's going on, having played it recently, and then okay, well, let's see what you can do to really figure out if it is a game that has longevity or not.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and do you know what? I think even if it doesn't necessarily manifest this sort of long-term interesting competitive strategy system, I think it's still just a really interesting sort of simulation and set of mechanisms. It's so high level, it's so abstracted, and there's a lot of really important stuff that's just, omitted because it'd be too much. But I still think, just as a sort of a basic introduction to sort of like the fundamentals of capitalism, it's a really sort of interesting way of looking at all the different interworking things,
Yep, agreed. And I was just thinking, I have put in the mean cards. Maybe you're already playing with them, but there's like 5 or 6 cards for each faction that increase the interactivity, shall we say, because they're directly targeting.
I don't think we ever omitted those.
Yeah. So my first few games didn't have them, and then added them once everybody kind of got a game in. Or most players had a game in, just to see what the difference was. But yeah, a New World Order this year, perhaps.
Yeah, it's certainly a smaller
spiritual
box,
sequel.
Yeah. So, well, the next title from Hegemonic Project Games.
Yeah,
so that'll be exciting to check out.
And that is 2023 for me. Is there anything you're looking forward to in 2025?
So
that you've not already played?
That I've not already played. Yeah, I mean, so I'm obviously really excited for the next campaign for Earthborne Rangers. I'm also really excited for Molly House, which is the next Cole Whirly game. That's a sort of set in the Victorian era. It's the sort of underground movement for homosexuals. I don't know much more about it than that, so for me it represents a good learning opportunity as well, which is appealing. So far Cole Whirly's batting pretty strong for me. What about you?
Just thinking about what I've already backed and what I already know. Next year's going to be big on role-playing games, so I have a Trail of Cthulhu coming, I have the Discworld RPG coming, I have the next case for Blade Runner coming. I have backed Dinogenics. I think you've backed that as well, but that's a reprint, so doesn't count. Same with Puerto Rico. I'll get the fancy version of that at some point. I feel like I of course did also back the War of the Ring full
Super Fancy
deluxe
Edition.
nonsense.
Yeah.
I think I'll probably get a couple of games in of other people's before mine comes, and then I'll decide whether or not it's worth opening and playing everything or not. But so mostly things that are known, apart from really the Discworld RPG, which I'd not played much of, or any of, in fact. But I can't think of any other big board games that I've been waiting on coming out this year.
Well, I'm sure that once we stop recording this podcast, I'll be like, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what? I do have a soft spot for like what I call my overworld adventure games, right? Which is like Mage Knight and Euthia and Dungeon Universalis. So these sort of games where you walk across a map and have adventures and stuff like that. So they're, you know, it's like sort of grander scope dungeon crawler RPGs, right?
Well, Mage Knight expansion.
So Mage Knight expansion I'm very excited about. And also Iridia, which is the fantasy game from the creators of Zia. You know, Zia, the spaceship pick up and deliver tradie game. So I liked Zia conceptually a lot more than I liked it in practice. And I thought the expansions did some good stuff with the more robust economic trading stuff. But it didn't really do enough sort of for me. So I'm wondering if like the Iridia is gonna scratch that itch, because it just falls more into the sort of, not that I like fantasy necessarily more than space, but just sort of fantasy adventure board gamey stuff. I'm excited to check it out.
I enjoyed Zia, but only played it once, and I wasn't very good at it. So
never again.
No. Sorry, if I never played anything I wasn't any good at again, then you know the far fewer games on my shelf.
Yeah, fair enough. So there's that. I'm also currently sitting here with Ascendancy, which is an absolutely nonsense big box. So I'm going to crack into that, I think, next. And
have a look. No, Ra. There's an absolutely nonsense big box to come. Yeah, everything I bought is all reprints, but at least then you know you're getting a good game, you know?
Oh, do you know what I'm quite excited for, actually? Is Above and Below Haunted. You know, the follow-up to Above and Below. That's remained as
never played any of, what's his name, Ryan
Lockett's games. Red
games.
Raven
Never
games?
played any of them.
Really? Never played any of them?
No, it did not appeal to me at all.
That's fair. I guess that's fair.
Oh yeah, never played Sleeping Gods.
Yeah, he did Empires of the Void. What's it called? The Ancient City. Something Ancient City.
Oh, we played 8 Minute Empire.
Oh, we did play 8 Minute Empire. Yeah.
So there we go. I'm telling you lies.
Well, I think that is a bit of an outlier in that it's a tiny little box game and it's a little area control thing. But yeah, I mean, he's done some small
I like
stuff.
that.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You like 100% of his games that you've played.
That I've played, yeah.
But Above and Below is one that Leanne really likes, and I find it sort of a fun little diversion. It's a very basic Euro game with some push your luck, choose your own adventure attached, which is generally not worth doing in the game, but I always just do it because it's the most fun thing to do. So it's sort of like one of those flawed games that actually I find I don't mind its flaws because I enjoy the little adventure part of it, the narrative driven part of it. So I did get Above and Below Haunted, which is the sequel, which I assume is just kind of going to be more of the same. I'm hoping there's a little bit more development of the adventure book in this one, because I've said this before on the podcast, but the Above and Below adventure book is, I mean, it's functionally a worker placement game where you can either do useful actions with your workers or you can send them on an adventure, which might be useful, but reading what happens to them and rolling dice to see what happens to them is inevitably more fun than just putting them out as a worker placement thing. But the adventures always end with like, you know, you either like you confront the demon and then it's like, okay, roll the dice to see if you can defeat the demon or not. And then if you succeed, it doesn't actually tell you what happens. It's not like, you've defeated the
Right.
demon, you know, and you find, there's a princess that he'd kidnapped and you rescue her and she sends you rewards from the kingdom or something, you know? It's just like, roll to defeat the demon. If you get 8 or more, have a mushroom.
Right, yeah.
And you're like, what? And it's like, if you get
Less
2
your
or
own
less,
imagination.
your person flips to injured. It's like, no, at least tell me what happened. Like, you know, we confronted the demon
Yeah.
and then we thought we'd got them cornered, but they lashed out and they injured someone and they got away. You know, give me a bit of more flavor text. Come on, that's what we're doing here, right?
If you're going to tell a story, tell a story.
Yeah, or tell the ending.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm hoping that there'll be a little bit more development of the adventure book. But either way, you know, it's not actually enough to, because you can improvise the endings anyway, and we've had great fun with that. So, you know, it's still something I play, and I'm quite happy to play. So I'm keen to check out that.
Nice. Well, congratulations on making it through another year.
Well, likewise, and another year to go. We've got some cool new games to come up. I guess we'll be talking about some of our next things. I'll probably be talking about Station Fall on the next podcast because I've been playing that. And I also have to talk about... Oh, I'll tell you what, it was AI 100% Human.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll maybe talk about that on the next podcast. I'd like to get another play in before I talk about it.
Yeah.
And what are you gonna talk about in the next podcast, Barry?
Well, the next podcast, I've played a lot of games over Christmas and New Year. The standout ones. Let me check my notes. I'll probably have played more things between now and then anyway. But the standout games, I didn't talk about Age of Wonders Planetfall because I don't think I'd played it at that point. I want to talk about Age of Wonders Planetfall because that was fun. I might talk about Res Arcana Duo. Have you played Res Arcana? Same game.
Yes.
I've
played that too then.
Yeah, like it's identical in every way. If I get another game of Civolution in, might be able to talk about that.
I will try to play that again so we can talk about that. Because I played that once.
Yeah, and I think I'll probably play another couple of games of Fromage, but then I'll probably be done with it. So we'll see whether it's worth talking about.
Very well. So if you want to hear about all of that, make sure you follow the podcast or do what you need to do to make sure that you get the next episode, which will be coming along in 2 weeks, probably. And otherwise, from us, that's it for the best of 2023, unless we figure out we were wrong.
Still more games to play. Always more games to play.
There's always more games to find.
Till next time. Bye.